Okay, let's begin. I want to talk about happiness today. In particular, I want to talk about what it is, where does it come from, why does it exist, and how can we get more of it. When I was a little kid, I used to ride my bike all over the place, and one day I was riding my bike. I was probably in 7th grade, 6th grade, and I saw a $20 bill on the ground. And so I went and got the $20. For me, $20, at that age was a really big deal. And I was really excited. And as I was riding my bike then around, I've got this $20, and I'm imagining all the great things that I can do with it. I started pondering. This was maybe the first time I ever had an intellectual thought in my life. And my thought was this. I thought, wow, I'm so happy right now. But my parents have a lot of friends. My parents were not rich at all. We were very poor, in fact. My parents had some friends who were much, much richer than they were. And I could tell going over to their house, they were no happier. And this got the little wheels in my head turning. I'm like, well, how is it that getting money can make me so happy, but from my small sample size, I've concluded that rich people are not happier than poor people? And it really started to make my head hurt because it was like one of those Escher drawings where, if I kept finding the $20, I'd be happier, and all of a sudden I find myself as one of the rich people who are no happier than the poor people. And I shouldn't say poor people, but the maybe medium people and the rich people. And so I've pondered that for a long, long time because it took me years and years and years to figure out what the answer is here. And in order to understand it, this paradox, in order to understand the paradox, you have to think about, all right, well, what's the actual topic that we're talking about? And we're talking about emotions. And emotions are something that's not foreign to this class. We've talked about a whole range of emotions and why they exist. Some of these emotions, things like jealousy. Remember I talked about my friend Judith and her boyfriend who would call her from across the country to sit on her. Because he had jealousy. He didn't like that she was going out all the time with these other friends who possibly had romantic intentions or not. He didn't know. But he felt a lot of jealousy. Perhaps you've felt that before. We've got other emotions, things like desire. We have the emotion anger. And these are things, make no bones about it. This is your brain is causing you to feel a certain thing in a certain situation, and that is influencing your behavior, causing you to do something. When I think of anger, for me, it's funny, out of all the experiences of anger that I've had in my life, and it's quite a few, the one that always sticks with me was when I was teaching LS 15, not this quarter, but a couple of quarters ago when I did that ultimatum game, remember, where we split the pie, $35 for you, 5 for them, or 15 for you, 25 for them. And I asked people why they would say no to $5, free $5, a free orange chicken bowl. And do you remember what the guy said, the one who really made the impression on me? I said, why would you turn down free money? And he said, because it's a freaking disgrace. And he was really upset, and the veins were popping out on his head. He was angry because there was the perception of unfairness. Something was unjust in the world, and that generated that emotion in him. And I can't laugh at him, right? Because what made me really angry that I'm still talking about 10 years later? Cheapskate, the guy who would not pay his share of the bill at dinner. And I haven't seen him in years. Look, my heart rate goes up. I'm like, that loser. Guy makes me so mad, yeah. Anyway, so these are emotions, but the point is, emotions cause us to alter our behavior. So it's not just some random thing, hey, that's funny that we feel this way. We feel these ways in particular situations that cause us to alter our behavior, that get a better outcome for our genes. So you've got things like desire. Who is it that you desire? When do you desire them? Things like guilt that make you feel bad, maybe for situations where you've messed with reciprocal altruism relationships that you have going on. And so happiness fits right in here. And this is something that I want to talk about today, which is how does that relate to our genes? So where do these things come from? What's their purpose? And I would summarize it, if I could, this way. I'd say emotions alter our behavior in ways that are beneficial to our genes. That's why they exist. And if happiness is one of those, we should be able to dissect it and try and figure out, okay, well, when are our genes going to produce it? Given that I like the feeling of happiness, if I can structure my life in such a way that I get as much of that happiness feeling in my head as possible, that's good. This is a topic that has relatively recently become a pretty active area of research. People are realizing that, yes, it is an emotion, therefore we can examine it experimentally. Here's one way that you could look at it. This is not a great way of doing it, but people have pointed it out, and there's some good data. If money makes us happy, where should the suicide rates in the world be highest and lowest? Are they? The assumption there, people who ask this question, of course, the assumption is that suicide would represent some low point of happiness. If that were the case, you would assume, all right, well, let's just look for the richest countries in the world. We're not going to see suicide there. Let's look for the poorest countries in the world. We should see much more suicide there. Of course, that's not true. You read in Mean Genes. What are the two countries where suicide rates are the highest? Where else? Finland. Yes, Japan and Finland, both fairly wealthy countries. Most of the lowest rates of suicide in the world are in African countries that tend to have very, very low levels of wealth. That's one way. I'm not super happy with that. Nonetheless, that does go against this idea that money makes us happy, which I'm going to make the point today that that's a simplistic way of looking at it. You have to be a little bit more subtle. Obviously, the $20 bill that I found made me happy, but it wasn't necessarily the $20 itself. We're going to see it with some other aspect of it. Another study that has been ongoing in the U.S. is this. There are some researchers who every year ask the same group of people, and they introduce new people to this group. They say, how happy are you with your life? And they come up with all sorts of different scales for doing this. I love it, though, because people get really confused when you ask them, okay, how would you rate your entire life on a scale of 1 to 7? You're like, well, I don't know. It's finals week, but I have shelter, but, you know, I wish I had more money, et cetera, et cetera. Here's what they found. They've summarized here from 1971, another summary 10 years later. In the U.S., here's how it looked. This particular study, the well-being was ranked on a scale that went up to about 50, and annual income, there was a slight relationship, but not statistically significant. Didn't matter. 10 years later, people were significantly richer. The average house was twice as many square feet, nicer cars, more money. The average level of happiness, or people self-reported rating of how happy they are with their life, no change. I want you to think experimentally, how would you get at this? Because these studies are easy to criticize, but the question itself, what's the relationship between wealth and happiness, is an important one. Question in the back. Cost of living is going to be really critical to this. Yeah, exactly, because you'll say, all right, you've got more money, but things cost more, so you're not really getting more. So that's part of it, that it becomes difficult to measure wealth. That might be one thing. But something else I want you to think about is not just how much it costs to live, but the fact that everybody else is getting more money too. I want you to be thinking about this relative nature that might be important as well. So from this study, I would conclude, and again, it's a cautious conclusion because there are a lot of weaknesses to the study. It's a self-report study. Remember, these are notoriously bad. You get somebody on one day versus another, and they can have a significant difference in their happiness level. Do you remember an example from Mean Genes where a tiny thing influences inordinately how happy people are with their lives? It's one of the strangest studies in the whole book. Finding the dime in the photocopier. Yeah, the psychologist did the experiment where they were doing this. They were asking people, how do you rate your happiness of your life overall? And then they set up this other thing where these people, it was in a photocopier room in the psychology department, and they could rig it so that after these certain people used the machine, there was a dime in the coin return. And so they asked those people, the only difference between the two groups was one group had found a dime in the photocopier, the other group had not found them. They found a significant increase in their happiness. It's really weird, but it's consistent. It's been replicated over and over again. So something's going on. That tells me be very wary of people's ratings of happiness because they can, turn on a dime, as it were. But they can change a lot. But also, that's going to give us some insight into how we can create our own happiness. We're going to find out if we can, make it so all the photocopiers we use have dimes in them that can lead to us being happier. And I don't mean it literally, but figuratively. Happiness researchers often think, all right, well, this is just one of these features, I don't know if I call it a feature, a bug of industrial society, that advertisers have created the desire to acquire material wealth. And that if we look elsewhere, we'll find something else. And this is a good question to raise because, as I've told you, anytime you want to investigate the underlying genetic causes of something, you want to make sure that it's not just a cultural explanation. The way you do that is you want to look at a bunch of different cultures. And if you get the same result, then you can start generalizing. You also want to, you could look at young kids as opposed to grown-ups because they're going to have been less influenced by culture and so on. For this, there's not a huge amount to study. I'm going to give you just one anecdotal study. You don't have to write this down, but this is from a book. There's an anthropologist we wrote about in Mean Genes a lot, Napoleon Chagnon. He wrote a book called Yanomamo. He called them The Fierce People. But he wrote about his experiences living among them. They're in South America. These are a group that have agriculture. They grow plantains. They are extremely polygynous. They don't move around a lot. And so the group size they go anywhere from 40 to a couple hundred, every now and then 300. But he went down there and he was the first Westerner to make contact with them, and he wanted to live among them for a while. He, in particular, was testing some hypotheses about protein and wealth. He thought that the more protein people had, the happier they would be, the more powerful they would be, the more they would be able to acquire resources, etc. But anyway, as an anthropologist going down there, you have to bring lots of stuff that you can give people in exchange for them talking with you, being interviewed by you, and so on. And here's what he wrote. He said, so as I said, you don't have to write this down. You'll remember it. I would be bitterly disappointed. So this would be any time he would go away to another village, he'd lock his stuff up in his trunk, and when he would come back, they'd have banged on it. They'd have tried to yank the lock off. And all of his stuff was broken into or stolen or had been attempted to be broken into repeatedly. So he says this, I'd be bitterly disappointed that my erstwhile friend thought no more of me than to finesse our personal relationship with the intention of getting at my locked up possessions. The hardest thing to learn to live with was the incessant, passionate, and often aggressive demands that they made. Now, this is just anecdotal. I have lots of other anecdotes. I have a lot of anthropologist friends who have gone and lived in different societies, and it's a universal finding. They come in, they have axe handles, knives, medicine, antibiotics, T-shirts, anything that they have. They say there's a phenomenal desire for it, and people will do almost anything. They want stuff. And so I'm not giving you good data, but I'm telling you to trust me based on the anecdotes, that acquisitive desires exist cross-culturally. Nonetheless, I'd like you to think about, in terms of our exam coming up, how would you prove this? How would you design a study that would allow you to definitively say that the desire to have more stuff is something that is cross-cultural? All right, so I'm call this our first take-home message. We've got 3 today. But I want to view happiness as a tool that our genes use, like all emotions, to induce us towards behaviors that benefit them. That is, we imagine that these things we want, if we get them, then we'll be happy. When in actuality, what we're going to see is that it's making progress towards them that makes us happy. This is the subtle idea that I'm going to present today. This is the most important one. And we're going to look into why would it be that it's the getting of the money, the change in your situation, rather than the absolute level of your situation that's going to be more important. Oh, I meant to mention there's been a long-running study in Japan on happiness, and they found since 1958 there's a 300% increase in average income. 300% increase. There's been no change in their average happiness rating there, with pretty big sample sizes. All right, so I'm making the assertion here that it's about a change in your situation. In other words, it doesn't matter the absolute level, it's the relative level that matters, and the change in that level. Sorry. So the question becomes, if it's our genes that are setting up these emotions in us and they are causing them to occur under specific sets of circumstances, why is it that this is how it would work? Why would they care only about improvement rather than absolute levels? In other words, why am I happy when I find the $20, but actually just having $20 more doesn't help me? Well, remember, this recurring theme that we've had all quarter is this. Evolution's a relative game. I define fitness as the relative reproductive success of an individual with one genotype versus the alternatives. In other words, the genes that increase in frequency in the population are the genes that do better than all the alternatives. So there's no reference to the genes that cause you to have 4 offspring are the ones that are the most fit. That's not it. It's just the genes that are better than the others. It's a question of market share. So I always referred to fitness, or I made the analogy of market share. That's how natural selection works. The alleles that win are those that do better than the others. So now think about evolution is built in your brain so that you feel happiness in certain situations. Well, now it doesn't make sense, given that evolution doesn't work with respect to these absolute levels, but all that matters is that you're doing better than other people. That's when you have to be rewarded. That's when your brain has to tell you you've done the right thing. That's when your do-it-again centers have to say, whatever that was good. And it's that you made an improvement in your relative position as compared to everyone else. That seems reasonable, right? We can all agree that that made sense in fitness. It's a mathematical truth that we watch certain alleles increase in frequency, other alleles decrease in frequency, and it works. However, the consequences of this are really staggering. At least to me, they are staggering, because the implications of change being the critical feature of happiness, change in your status as opposed to your absolute level, ripple through all over the place. I've got a picture here of the lottery. You've probably heard of these results. If you're like me, they so run against what you think that it's almost impossible to believe them. But we adjust quickly to good fortune. So the studies that have been done ask lots and lots of people, what do you rank your happiness on a scale of 1 to 7? They then go and people who have won the lottery, they ask them, what do you rate your happiness on a scale of 1 to 7? What's the average score of people who have won the lottery? 7, right after they win the lottery. It really is great. However, they go back to them a year later. What's their average level of happiness? Not significantly different from people who have not won the lottery. It's almost impossible to believe this. I can't believe this. I get so much pleasure. I never actually play the lottery because you can't win. Nonetheless, I imagine playing it, and I imagine winning, and I get so happy because my genes are going nuts. They're thinking, if suddenly you were better off, everything would be good. Then you'd be happy. Not true. So lottery winners is one hypothesis that was tested and turned out to be true. People who get a salary increase every year. the change is there, and they're happy when they get the raise. They very quickly baseline it. It's like, yeah, I know, but cost of living goes up. Everybody else is getting a raise. It's no big deal. If I rate my happiness on a scale of 1 to 7, I'm a 5.5, whatever. You have to think about what are all the other ways. Anytime I put forth a hypothesis or you develop a hypothesis, you have to figure out how to test it. It's not any good to us if it's just an assertion. So you have to think about ways of testing it. So we would expect this, given that your genes only care about relative changes. If something terrible happens and all of a sudden you're much worse off, we would expect that you recover rapidly. It doesn't help your genes to just mope around forever then, like, something bad happened. It's bad because they want to send you the signal, don't let those bad things ever happen again. However, it goes away because your genes have to improve their relative position. So for this one, some very tough studies people have done where they go and they ask accident victims, people who have been paralyzed, how do you rate your happiness? How cruel is that? They go into the hospital and they ask people, and they bottom out at 1. People really are unhappy with that change. Between 6 months and a year later, their scores have returned to their pre-accident levels. Question?
Does that happen with people like war veterans and stuff like that?
Does this happen with war veterans? They've done it with a whole bunch of people that have had various types of accidents. So I don't know specifically that. My guess would be yes. So this leads to advice, at least when Terry and I were writing Mean Genes, we thought, all of this research, it's just people testing hypotheses, but we're thinking about how can we make our lives better? What can we do with this information? And I think that should be valuable to you as well. The first one, this seems obvious, but you have to take your goals less seriously. Because, like me imagining how great it's going to be when I win the lottery, getting there really is good. Having those goals, not as great as you think it's going to be. Terry and I were talking once with this friend of ours, Peter Ellison, and he's one of these guys. He's a professor. He's kind of an absent-minded professor, and he's really just sort of a mess. He's always behind on everything that he's supposed to be doing. He once sent Terry an email inadvertently. It was intended for the editor of some journal, and it was just apologize. So sorry that I've messed up. I haven't done all that work I told you I was going to do. It's been crazy, blah, blah, blah. I'm behind schedule. And so that's sort of the guy he is. He's always really behind. And so Terry and I were talking to him once, and he had been an undergraduate at Harvard, and then he had gotten into graduate school at Harvard, and then he'd gotten a faculty job there. And so we were asking him, because we knew now he'd been a professor there for a while, we were thinking, you'd be really, really happy if you could get tenure. Then you have a permanent job here and a lot of status, right? Then you'd be happy. And as we were talking to him, he's like, I can't even think about that. That's so hard. It's unlikely that it'll happen. But we're like, but then you'd be happy, right? You've got all these things before, but that would sort of be it. Finally, you'd be happy. And he's like, I think I would. And so sure enough, he got tenure. And a couple of years later, we said, remember when you thought that you'd be happy when you got tenure? Do you think you're any happier now? And he's like, if I could get this grant that I'm working on, I think then I would be happy forever. And so we go back to him now. Now it's become a joke that we'll say, if you could become dean of the entire graduate school at Harvard, which he became, then would you be happy? And he's like, I think if I got that job, I would be happy. And it's not true. He's a mess. He's exactly the same happiness he's always been. So this is kind of a negative. Achieving your dreams won't make you happier forever. Thank you. That's the end of class. No, I'm not going to bum you out. But that's pretty good, right? It means that that's not the secret. Those tremendously lofty goals you have, that's not the be-all, end-all. That's not where you should be looking, because we know that's the case, that when you achieve them, on average, your happiness is going to be exactly what it is now. There's a lot of variance one person to the next, but we all return more or less to that baseline. Now, on the other side of this is that you can take more chances, and specifically, the pain and humiliation of failure or rejection are nowhere near as long-term as you would imagine they'd be. Lots of people are really cautious. They're afraid to ask someone out on a date, We know the data, right, for what the likelihood on Bruin Walk, if you're average intelligence and you ask someone if they'll go on a date with you is, right? What was it? It was about 50%. Most people are too afraid to do that because they think, oh, no, I would never get over that humiliation. You will. So you got to take more chances. Be friends with happy people. I'm not being facetious here. As I said, everyone's got these levels they return to, but there is some variation from one person to the next. On that scale of 1 to 7, people vary all the way from averages of 3 to averages of 6, and they tend to always return to those. So the people who are depressed right now because, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to get into my major, or my girlfriend just dumped me, and you imagine as soon as these things are cleared up, then they'll be happy. Guess what? They're not. They're always that level. And so cut them loose. Sorry, did I say that out loud? All right, so these are the implications for our lives here. It's the progress that is critical, and this is within your control. We're designed to feel happy when we achieve some level of progress, and that can be material gain, monetary gain, or something else, increases in status. And so you have to set up your life so you're going to be able to generate as much happiness here as possible. So one of the things that Terry has told me he most benefited from in Mean Genes is that he and I both are maniacal about our list, our daily to-do list. And I would always ask him, what's on your list for tomorrow? What are you going to do? And he'd talk about his list, and his to-do list always had about 15 things on it. But the one time that I remember asking him this, he had on the list, one of the things was buy pants. He had to literally buy some pants. He also had another one that said write dissertation. And, I mean, just in the context of today's discussion, it's obvious what the problem was, but he wasn't seeing this at the time. And he had this list, and he said, I don't know what it is. He said, I really do want to get my PhD. I'm going to be happy when I finish graduate school. I'm excited about my research. But I got so many pants to buy. I have to just buy the pants. And it's become this metaphor for us now that I put the list together every day. And in fact, he'll call me. He called me earlier this week. And he's like, what are you doing today? And I said, I'm buying pants. And what I meant was not buying pants, but I'm sitting there and I'm cherry picking all the things off my list that I get to put an X through. Why am I doing that? Because I'm built to feel happiness when I see progress. And if I've got the equivalent on my list of write dissertation or buy pants, it's much easier to buy pants, and I still get that little boost. And so the idea here, what we understand about happiness is you got to set up your list so you see the progress. So it's like, and I'll set myself goals now because I am so susceptible to wanting to just buy pants all the time because I feel so accomplished. But you set up things now like my goal will be write the first sentence of the chapter that I'm working on. So for instance, I've been revising a chapter for the textbook I'm writing, and that's a daunting task. You know, a 40-page chapter, I need lots of data, graphs, figures, pictures, and if I say write chapter 1, I will never ever do it because that's a lot of work just to get one check off the list. So instead, my goal is write the first sentence of my chapter, because if I can get a good first sentence, then I can worry about other things later. And when I do that, it works. I came up with a good first line, and I got so excited that it caused me to do a bunch of other work that wasn't even on the list. Of course, I probably did what you do. As soon as I had done it, what did I do? I wrote it all on the list, and then I put the X through it, and I saw progress. So, I mean, it's silly, and I'm messing with my brain, and yet, you know, I'm simple enough that it works. I was really happy. Okay, so you got to set up your list in such a way. One other thing, someday maybe you'll be really devoted to your list. I realized this, that I had an ongoing list. I have a file open on my computer all the time, and it's my to-do list. And I'm always adding things because new things come up. It's like, oh yeah, I got to write the exam for LS15. Oh, prepare for the review section. Revise book. Buy some Christmas presents. Whatever. So you're adding things to your list. But every day I do lots of stuff, so I'm marking stuff off the list. So what's the net result in terms of what my to-do list looks like? The number of items always stays the same. And a few years ago, I thought, this is why every day at the end of the day, I go home a beaten man. Because I have not made my list shorter. I've done stuff all day, but I've structured my list so I can't win. I choose to go home when I'm too tired to work anymore, not when I'm done. And so just that little realization why I was depressed all the time going home, that I was not making progress, I was on a treadmill, I thought, well, all right, I need two lists. And what I do is the day before, I have the list that says today's list. And I'm not allowed to add to that list during the day. I have to add to it the day before. I put a reasonable number of things there, and then that's my list. When I'm done with it, I go home. Seems silly, but I see progress now every day. Then I create the new list, and you're laughing now, but you're going to think about that when you're making a list. It's very useful. Okay, here is a study we wrote about. You'll probably remember it because it's memorable. The colonoscopy study. Some researchers did this study where they talked to a bunch of people who were going in for this really painful procedure where essentially they stick a metal tube up your butt with a camera on it. They want to look for possibly cancerous lesions in your colon. So it's an important thing for early detection of cancer, but it's not pleasant at all. Lots of people who have it done, when the doctor says, come back in a couple weeks, we want to do it again, you're reluctant to go back. So here's what they did. One group had the regular 20-minute colonoscopy, and in the other group they did this. They gave them the 20-minute painful procedure, and then instead of pulling the tube out, they very, very, very gradually pulled it out over the course of 5 minutes, which turns out to be less painful than just ripping it out. So we'll call it 20 minutes of painful procedure versus 20 minutes of a painful procedure plus 5 minutes of reduced pain. And the question is, which do you prefer? Well, without having talked about what we've talked about, happiness being a relative thing that your genes are setting you up for, you think, well, you want to minimize your pain. No, you want to see improvement. In this situation, things are getting better. That's a pretty good situation. And so the question was, they said, here's how we're going to assess it. Who's more likely to return for a follow-up visit? Why is this a better measure than asking people, hey, how do you rate that experience on a scale of 1 to 100? Revealed preference, yes, RP, right? If they come back, we know if they liked it or not. So revealed preference, very important. Not liked it, but we know if they hated it less than the other people. So this study and some similar ones like it say that if you can cause the experience to end on a positive note, that's better. So listing these implications for our lives. Second one is this, that expectations are crucial to happiness because it's all about gauging your relative level. So if you already assume, hey, this is the level I'm at, this is what my salary is, then I'm not necessarily happier than I was when my salary was lower and my perception was, hey, this is where I am. So these expectations are critical, and because of that, it means we can get used to bad stuff. Doesn't necessarily drag us down. This is why the results of those studies where people are injured or crippled. I also wrote about in Mean Genes. It's just a novel, but it captures this really well. A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Remember this? So this is Chernobyl, where it's been completely evacuated after the problems with their reactor. But there was a similar. Alexander Solzhenitsyn is writing about a similar place in Siberia, labor camp. So he's following this prisoner. It's thought to be autobiographical. So it says, our hero Ivan has a truly awful day. He is starving and only gets a small portion of thin soup with bread. His clothes are threadbare, yet he must perform hours of manual labor in freezing weather. He's in a prison camp. As he goes to sleep, though, Ivan is fully content and concludes, it has been, and this is a quote, a day without a cloud, almost a happy day. So that's kind of weird. Here he is, he's in a Russian work camp, but he's already baselined all that. He knows he's there. He knows what the food is like, what the work is like. And so all of a sudden, what he's doing, because his expectations were for all that, a slight blip up from that is good. So there are two sides to all these happiness issues. One is that we get used to the bad stuff. The other is that we also get used to the good stuff. It doesn't make us happy in the long run. All right, so here's our second take-home message. Whoops, sorry. It's this. So absolute levels of whatever it is that we're looking at tend to have very little effect on happiness, but we love making progress. And expectations play a central role. So here's a somewhat silly question, but again, you probably didn't have the answer before, and now you do. It's this. Let's say you've got some good news. Do you give it all out at once, or do you break it down into smaller bits? Alternatively, if you've got bad news to give. For this, I always think of a friend of mine, Carol, and Carol does everything wrong with respect to this. I've had lots of parties, and I'll invite Carol to parties, and Carol always bails on parties. She never, ever comes. And the minute I ask her, she knows she's not coming, but she views that as bad news, and so she can say, sorry, thanks for the invitation, I'm not coming. But instead, what does she say? I think I might be able to, I got to check my calendar. Then a week later, I'm trying to get out of this other thing that I have. The day of, hey, I'm excited about your party, I hope I can come. And then she doesn't come. And she thinks somehow that she's lessening the blow. And all she's doing is making it so that a huge number of my interactions with her are her delivering bad news to me. Or, what she perceives as bad news. I expect it, so it's not that bad to me. But so think about that. So this idea, because we're so afraid of delivering bad news, if you give it all at once, you tend to be better off. On the other hand, with good news, every time you give the little bits of the good news, it's a boost. It's the dime in the photocopier of someone else. And so break it up into lots of little bits. I think about this because I might, let's say I decide, I'm going to buy a gift for Julia. And for instance, I bought her something the other day, and it was just something online. It's so dumb, I'm not even going to tell you. But I bought it, and I thought, I'll give it to her maybe Christmas, or I don't know when. And I was talking to her later, and she was asking, what'd you do today? And it dawned on me, I thought, I could tell her I got her a gift. And I'm not giving it to her. I'm not getting, nothing comes from that. And I thought, that might then decrease the happiness when I give it to her. And I thought, no, I'm breaking this good news up into lots of little bits. I said, hey, I got you a gift today. Made her happy. She didn't get anything from me. She will later, but it's just a silly example, but of this situation where all the little bit boosts are good. So think about that. It's very hard to give the bad news all at once. You have to do it that way. All right, the second item on our outline here is this. Let's see. Tell me something that's good and natural.
Agave.
What is?
Agave.
Agave, okay. Isn't that what they make tequila out of?
Yeah.
It tastes like honey. It's just from the plant, though.
All right. Can I say tequila? I really love tequila. All right, now I'll. Okay, what else? Give me something else that's natural and good. Sugar. Something else. Sex. Fair enough. What else? Give me maybe one more thing. Give me something else. Marijuana. All right. Have you spent any time in jail? It's not that great. I'm going to move it down there just because, if you take a long view of it. All right, give me something that is unnatural and good.
Trans fats.
What's that?
Trans fats.
Trans fats. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yes, those are great. When you hydrogenate vegetable oils, it puts them on in an orientation that I don't know of any situations in nature where you see them. That's why it's a good example. There may be some, but I don't know of any, and they're very hard to digest. What else is good and unnatural? Alcohol. Well, to really process it, though, and age it in like an oak cask, I'm with you. Yeah, we're not talking just rubbing alcohol. Is it all right, maybe. We'll discuss it. What's that? Contacts? Contact lenses. No, they're unnatural, but they're good. What else? TV? All right, I love TV.
You don't know.
I don't know. I don't watch it, but I love it. A nice car, like specifically. A Ferrari. Ferrari is nice. All right. Okay. What else? I made some as well. Yeah, I had cars. Oh, movies. Come on. All right, give me something that is... There's a point to this, but give me something that's bad and natural. Smallpox. Yes. Yeah, I think we can all agree that it is both bad and natural. What else? What's... All right. Yeah, fires. Fires. I live in Malibu. They're very bad. Earthquakes. I used to love earthquakes when I was younger. I thought they were fun. Then as soon as you own property, they're not that fun at all. What else is... Giving birth? I have never done it, but I've seen it, and I'm with you. All right, death. Natural, yeah, that's a good one. Okay, what about the last one? Do I have another color? I don't. Sorry, I got to stick with this. Something that's bad and unnatural. Finals. Not for this class. It's going to be satisfying. You're going to walk out and feel good about yourself and what you've learned.
I'm not going to want to kill I'll depress.
Weapons. Interesting. Yeah, that's good. What else did I put on my list? Pollution, yeah. You might also say TV. Some people don't like it. What did you say? Trash. All right, that's kind of pollution. All right. All right, so there is an important point to this, and here's what it is. There is a thing called the naturalistic fallacy. And the naturalistic fallacy, it's important to this class because we've been talking about all sorts of different things that have been produced by evolution. In making this chart, what we see is it's not that we can only fill in there are things that are good and natural and there are things that are bad and unnatural. Whether or not something is natural or unnatural doesn't give us any information about whether it's good or bad. There are things that fall into every category. So a priori knowledge ahead of time, this is natural, doesn't then allow you to think, oh, okay, so I know then that it's good, or I know that it's bad. Now, that seems kind of obvious that whether or not something is natural or unnatural doesn't influence whether it's good or bad. And yet people commit this fallacy all the time. When are you most likely to commit this naturalistic fallacy? Grocery store, yes. You look around at the ingredients, and what's the most common word on any package? Natural, all natural. Now, what have they told you when they've said that? Something about it is that it was produced in nature, but they're playing on this idea that you have that, oh, so it must be better. And the reason this is important for this class is that we talk about all sorts of things that have evolved, biological drives or urges, things that, maybe they are a tendency among mammals to not be monogamous. So a lot of people might say, aha, well, we learned in our class that, mammals are not monogamous. And what the person's really saying is, so guys can't help it if they cheat on their wife. Because that's the statement of, this is good because it's natural. Or a few years ago, there was a book written that was really controversial, but the point of the book was that the authors described in a bunch of different species, and for humans, situations in which what they called forced copulation occurs, rape. And they said, this occurs under all of these natural conditions. We can make predictions about which males would be more likely or less likely, under what situations, to be rapists, versus who is most likely to be a victim. People didn't like to see this at all. And why was that? Because they felt as though the biologists were saying, this is something produced by natural selection, therefore it's okay. They weren't doing that at all. But the widespread perception of this book is that if you tell us that something is natural, and natural is a very amorphous term, but lots of people think if it's produced by evolution, that it's natural, that then it's okay. And this course will give you all sorts of insights into how to live your life, how to structure your life for this or that. The one thing it's not going to do is give you insight into moral dilemmas or ethical decisions that you have to make. This is the one place where it really falls short. And so I'm going to call this our third take-home message, that just because something's produced by natural selection doesn't mean that it's morally good or right. Just because something's unnatural doesn't mean the opposite, that it's morally bad. So something you have to do is you have to break that connection. And as you can see from the way it's used in advertising, it's a very strong connection that people have. So you have to catch yourself when you're committing this naturalistic fallacy. It rears its head in lots of different situations. Here is rhinoceros. This is a Sumatran rhino. Here we have another rhinoceros. They're going extinct. There are lots of people who make this argument. They say that over the course of evolutionary history, all species go extinct eventually. 99.99% of all species that have ever existed on Earth have gone extinct. That's a true statement. I will make that statement. But someone who's committing the naturalistic fallacy will say, So why are we getting so upset because this dam we want to build somewhere is going to cause 2 species of little fish to go extinct? Things go extinct anyway. So the idea is, because it's natural, it's going to happen anyway, that it's morally acceptable or unacceptable. My point is that we don't have any information. It doesn't tell us one way or another whether or not it's the right thing or the wrong thing to do. You have to break that link. Okay, the next thing I had on the list, take-home messages. I'm always thinking about what are the take-home messages since we're running out of time in this class. I'm hoping that you'll think along these lines. When you try and think about when someone asks you, what did you learn in this class, I would hope that you could run off a list of a few things. A lot of them are related to this question of, are we forever going to have these desires and urges of moderately polygynous hunter-gatherers, don't have food, have to track it down all the time? And in this course, I've tried to highlight some of these drives so that we could think about them to recognize when they are present in your life, when you are feeling them, so that you can make the decision, is this the way that I want to go or not? So we have issues like family. We favor kin over non-kin, even if the non-kin are more qualified for the job. I made the joke, but it's true that Sylvester Stallone always puts his brother Frank in his movies. Frank Stallone is not a very good actor, and he's always there, but that's what he does. Lots of people do this. You probably do it yourself. You favor the kin over non-kin. Why is that? They share genes with us. What else do we have? Issues. These are in no particular order. What was this called? Do you remember the word? Mate guarding, but amplexus, when they're actually stuck together for what was the equivalent of about 10 years of their life. Why do we see mate guarding and a minimization of paternal care? Depends on the constraints of the biological system. So if you have a system where fertilization is internal to the females, male can never be sure that the offspring is his. If you have a situation where she's going to lay the eggs at some point, and he wants to assure paternity, he has to guard her. So we've got that. What else? We have issues like choosiness in females. We expect that they're going to be very choosy in terms of deciding who they want to be with in terms of a long-term mating partner. So we expect choosiness. The studies, I didn't talk about them, but you read about them. Remember, they took the photo and they said, rate this guy for his attractiveness. And in one case, he's wearing the outfit of a plumber. Actually, the better version of this study, they had him dressed up in a Burger King uniform. And then you show him this way. It's the same guy. Same picture. And all they've done is change significantly higher rating of attractiveness when he's wearing the suit. And so on the one hand, that's silly. On the other hand, now that you know that, you got to factor that in when you're trying to figure out if you want to manipulate someone, then you got to manipulate them. You have to understand what they are coding for or not coding for. One of the jokes, Terry and I forget if we wrote it in Mean Genes, but we think about it all the time. If I come to work and I really have to work hard, I wear what I call the Burger King uniform. It's not really a Burger King uniform. Thank God I don't have one. But it means that I'm not walking to Ackerman to buy some food because the embarrassment, the humiliation would be too great. I'm wearing grubby, shorts and a torn shirt or something like that. I have to hide in my office all day. All I can do is work. So it forces me to alter my behavior slightly. What else do we have? Things like putting yourself above everyone else. Always remember Terry's T-shirt. It says, I'm with R equals 0, or, R equals 1. What else do we have? When you think of Tom Cruise now, hopefully you'll think of a whole string of things that all these things about him, this gossip that you've learned, but it is a manifestation of the fact that you've got a detailed subconscious record-keeping mechanism for who owes you and who you owe, because reciprocal altruism is really important in humans. You don't have to write all these things down. I forgot to tell you. I just made a quick list of things I'm hoping that fall into this category of desires, urges, ways that we are that hopefully make more sense now in light of this class. But we know all those things about Tom, And we're never going to have any interaction with him. So that illustrates, one, that we're keeping track because reciprocal altruism is a very fragile system because you can get taken advantage of, but it's also very useful if you can have the reciprocal trading partners. And so we're always on that verge. I want to have the trading partner. No, I don't want to get take advantage of, and so on. And so you keep track, but it's also an example of mismatch because suddenly our world involves many people that we have data on, but we're not actually going to ever get in, be part of their life. What else? A weakness for the pleasures that drugs can bring. So we know that they can interfere with what goes on in the synapse. In this particular case, she's blocking reuptake of dopamine. Dopamine sits in the synaptic cleft for a longer period of time, and her brain is saying, let the good times roll. This is good. Because it's giving her the signal that she's doing something right. What else? Preferences. I didn't talk too much about this, but it's in Mean Genes. These physical signs of fertility, things like youth, lack of disease, other things that are related to fertility, etc. I ran out of colors, so but there are more, hopefully. So for each of these drives, and there are lots more, what I want you to be able to think about and be more knowledge about is why we have a drive, what direction it's pushing you in, and then to be able to step back and say, how do I want to be? Do I want to be this way or do I not want to be this way? A lot of people imagine that understanding the stuff that we've been learning in this class is depressing, right? All the stuff we talked about, friendship, that it can make you cynical. But I don't view it that way at all. I view it as really empowering. So even things like monogamy. I can know that humans are not, but as a mammal, we don't have a great record of monogamy. But actually having that knowledge can be comforting. It's like, oh, so I'm having trouble staying faithful to my partner. That doesn't mean that you're terrible, you're a bad person, or you're doomed to failure. It just means that you're a mammal. And so you can recognize that and understand it. There's a guy I know, E.O. Wilson, and he wrote in a book about human nature, he said that what he had learned was that the twig is bent from the start. And I love this phrase, the twig is bent from the start, because it means we're not a blank slate. And the idea that you're a blank slate, you can become anything or do anything, is misleading. It's going to lead you into trouble because you're going to encounter resistance to certain behaviors that you didn't expect. But if you know they're there, at least for me, it allows me to decide when am I going to be weak, when am I going to try and marshal all of my strength so that I can be the way I want, which is not always the way my genes want me to be. So that would be, I didn't even write a take-home message for it. That would be the ultimate take-home message from this class. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that. I should tell you, of all the things that I do in my life, writing books, going to movies, hanging out with friends, writing papers, teaching this class is my favorite thing. So study for the final. Don't let me down.